There's something about the things we carry quietly. The ones we've never said out loud, not because we don't want to, but because we haven't found the right place to put them down. That's what this is. People write in from somewhere private, a bedroom, a parking lot, a bathroom at a party, and they say the thing they've been holding. Not for advice. Not for an audience. Just to have it heard by someone who won't look at them differently in the morning. You know that feeling when you finally exhale after holding your breath for longer than you realized? That's what I want this to feel like for you. Whatever you're carrying tonight, you can set it down here for a little while. I remember the exact weight of that $20 bill in my pocket. Not metaphorically, literally. The way it sat against my thigh through the fabric of my jeans, folded in half, then half again, like it had its own heartbeat. Like it knew it didn't belong there. I was 11 years old, and I had taken it from my mother's purse. I take a breath here, because I want to get this right. I want to tell you what kind of house we lived in first, because the house matters. We lived in a split level on Deering Street, tan siding, a front porch with one step that always creaked. My dad had painted the mailbox green because he said the original black was depressing. My mom, Carol, kept the inside of that house the way some people keep promises. Deliberately. Every surface wiped down, every throw pillow where it was supposed to be. A little basket by the front door for shoes. Not because she was rigid, she wasn't, but because order was how she showed love. A clean house was a safe house. That was her logic, even if she never said it out loud. My dad, Ray, was the kind of man who sat in the same chair every single night. Brown leather recliner, left side of the living room, angled slightly toward the TV. He worked in logistics. I didn't understand what that meant until I was an adult. He came home at the same time every weekday, set his keys on the little hook by the door. He said I'm home like it was a complete sentence. Like it was enough. And somehow it was. We had dinner together every night. That was the rule. Not a spoken rule. It was never announced or enforced with consequences. It was just what we did, the way you breathe. 6:30. The three of us, plus my younger sister Becca, around a rectangular table with mismatched chairs. And I was the good one. I want you, not in a bragging way, in a weight-bearing way. Becca was the one who could get away with things because she'd flash this gap-toothed grin. I was the one who got good grades without being asked. The one my parents held up quietly without meaning to, as proof that they were doing something right. That identity, the responsible one, was not a crown. It was the whole house leaned on it. So, the $20. There was a girl in my class named Priya, and she had just gotten these shoes. White canvas sneakers with a little embroidered daisy on the side. And I wanted them so badly it embarrassed me. That's the honest truth. It was the kind of want that felt shameful even then. Because I knew we weren't a family that bought things just because they were pretty. We bought things when the old ones wore out. I had asked my mom for the shoes 2 weeks earlier. She looked at the price tag online, $38, and said maybe for your birthday, and my birthday was 4 months away. 4 months. When you're 11, that's basically geological time. I had $12 of my own, saved from helping Mrs. Terrence next door with her garden. I needed 26 more. But I only took 20 because, and I remember this thought so clearly it's almost funny. I remember thinking that taking 20 was less bad than taking 26. Like I was negotiating with myself. Like the universe would go easier on me for the smaller theft. My mom's purse was a big brown leather thing that lived on the kitchen counter. She never locked it. Why would she? This was a house built on trust. I waited until she was in the backyard talking to our neighbor over the fence. Becca was watching TV. My dad wasn't home yet. I walked into the kitchen like I was getting a glass of water. Opened the purse, found the little inner pocket where she kept her cash. I took one folded 20 from a small stack of them, and then I stood there for a second. You know that moment right after you do something, when the thing is done and you can't undo it and the air changes? When the room looks exactly the same but you know something in it is different, and the only thing that's different is you. That was that moment. I put the 20 in my pocket and got my glass of water. I stood at the sink drinking it, looking out the window at my mom, who was laughing at something the neighbor said. Her head thrown back, completely at ease, completely trusting. And I drank the whole glass without tasting a single drop. She asked me that night at dinner. Not accusingly. That was almost worse. She asked it the way you ask about the weather. Just a passing thing, a small domestic mystery. Did either of you girls get into my purse today? I'm a little short on cash, and I can't figure out where I put it. Becca shook her head without looking up from her plate. And I looked right at my mother. Right at her face, her tired, open, completely unsuspecting face, and I said, "No, I didn't touch it." She nodded. Must have miscounted. And she went back to her food. I sigh, long and slow, even now telling you this. Because it was that easy. That's the part that never left me. It was so easy that for one terrible second I felt something close to power. And that feeling scared me more than anything else. I ate my dinner. My mom had made lasagna, the good kind, with the crispy curled edges and the ricotta that went slightly golden on top. Her best thing. I moved it around my plate until my dad asked if I was feeling okay. And I said yes, I was just tired. And he reached over and squeezed my shoulder. And I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. I bought the shoes 3 days later at the mall with my friend Danny. I paid with my $12 and the 20. I carried the bag home and I hid the shoebox under my bed behind a plastic bin of old art supplies. And then the work began. Because the lie wasn't just one moment. That's what nobody tells you about lying when you're a kid. You think the hard part is the lie itself? The one sentence, the one no? I didn't. But the lie is actually a living thing. It needs to be fed. It needs maintenance. I wore the shoes to school but not home. I kept them in my locker. I told Priya not to say anything to my mom if she ever came up in conversation. And Priya, bless her, gave me this long look and said, "Why are you being so weird about shoes?" And I said I just didn't want to make a big deal out of it, and she shrugged and let it go. I started sleeping badly. Not dramatically, not waking up screaming. Just waking up at some hollow hour, 3 or 4 in the morning, when the house was completely silent and lying there with a flat, stale feeling in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. I'd stare at the ceiling and listen to the house settle and think about nothing and everything and nothing again until I finally fell back asleep. At dinner, I laughed too loud. I noticed it happening and couldn't stop it. Someone would say something mildly funny. Becca doing an impression of her teacher, my dad telling some dry story from work. And I would laugh bigger than the moment called for. Like I was auditioning for the role of normal kid having normal dinner. My mom glanced at me once with that particular look mothers have, the one that means I'm watching. But she didn't say anything. And then slowly, I started to let myself off the hook. This is the part I'm least proud of, and also the part I understand the most completely. It started as small thoughts. She didn't even miss it that much. She said she miscounted. Then I work hard. I do everything right. I deserve something nice once. Then, and this is where it got genuinely creative, she would have said yes if I'd asked at a better time. I basically just borrowed the timing. I actually thought that. By the end of the second week, I had constructed an entire internal courtroom and argued myself into a verdict of not guilty. The shoes were under my bed. The money was gone. My mother had moved on. Nobody was hurt. The world had kept spinning. The front steps still creaked. My dad still said I'm home at 6:15. And everything was exactly as it had been. Except it wasn't. And I knew it wasn't. But knowing and knowing are two different things, and I chose the first one. I wore the shoes home for the first time about a month later. Just walked in wearing them, casual, like they'd always existed. My mom looked down at them. "Those are cute. Are those new?" And I said, "Danny gave them to me." They didn't fit her. My mom smiled. That was nice of her. And she went back to chopping whatever she was chopping. I laugh a little even now, not because it's funny. Because I still don't know what else to do with it. Because that second lie was so smooth, so automatic, so completely unpanicked. that it frightened me in a different way than the first one had. The first lie I'd watched myself tell. The second one I barely noticed happening. I still have those shoes, actually. They're in a box in my closet. They don't fit anymore, haven't for 20 years. And I don't know why I kept them. Maybe as evidence. Maybe as penance. Maybe just because getting rid of them would mean making a decision about them. And I've been avoiding that for a long time. My mom is still alive. She's 63 now and she still keeps a clean house. She still makes lasagna for holidays, the kind with the crispy edges. I've thought about telling her. I've rehearsed it. I know exactly how I'd start. Mom, do you remember when you thought you miscounted your cash? And I know exactly how she'd look at me, that patient, slightly puzzled look. And I know she'd probably say something like, "Honey, that was forever ago," and then make me tea. But I haven't told her. And I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if it would be for her or for me. And until I can answer that honestly, I think I'll just keep the shoes in the box. And leave the question where I found it. Somewhere between the person I wanted her to think I was and the person I actually was, in that kitchen, reaching into her purse when no one was looking. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. There's something about the stories that live in the dark. Not because they're monstrous, but because the light never felt safe enough. We all have a version of ourselves that only exists when the door is closed. The self that doesn't perform, doesn't explain, doesn't apologize for wanting what it wants. This next person knows that room better than most. She knows what it costs to love people completely and still keep something from them. Sit with that for a second. My name is Tariq. I'm 26 now, and I'm telling you this from a studio apartment in Columbus, Ohio, where the only thing on my walls is a small wooden frame with the Shahada written in my mother's handwriting, and a takeout menu from a Thai place I keep meaning to throw away. That detail matters. You'll understand why later. Growing up, our house smelled like cardamom and something faintly chemical, the starch my father used on his thobes. Every morning before Fajr, before the sky had decided what color it wanted to be, I would hear the hiss of the iron from my parents' room, my mother pressing fabric in the dark. 37 years she did that. Not once did she sleep through it. Not once did she ask for anything in return. I used to think that was the definition of faith. Now I think maybe it was just the definition of a life that had already been decided. We were Sudanese American, which meant we were two things at once, and fully neither. At school, I was the kid who didn't eat the pepperoni pizza at lunch. At the mosque, I was the kid whose Arabic had an accent. My father was an engineer. My mother taught Quran to girls in our basement on Saturday mornings. The house was warm. The rules were clear. Prayer 5 times a day. No alcohol. No girlfriends. No music with too much bass, which my father defined loosely and enforced inconsistently depending on his mood. We weren't strict in the way that made the news. We were strict in the quieter way, the way where nobody says the rules out loud because they don't have to. You just know. I was a good son. I want you to understand that. I wasn't performing it, not entirely. I loved Ramadan. I loved the way the whole house changed. The late nights, the smell of my mother's full madams at suhoor, my father reciting softly in the next room while I pretended to still be asleep. There was something about that darkness, that shared wakefulness, that felt like belonging in the purest way I've ever known. I fasted. I prayed. I got into Ohio State on a full scholarship, and my father cried at the kitchen table and called his sister in Khartoum, and I stood there feeling like everything I was supposed to be was finally, perfectly assembled. And then I got a roommate named Daniel who made pasta at midnight and watched cooking competition shows with the volume too loud, and somehow, that became the crack. Not Daniel himself. He wasn't a temptation. He was just a person who moved through life without all the weight I was carrying, and watching that up close, for the first time, was like pressing on a bruise I didn't know I had. What I wanted, what I had always quietly wanted, was not some dramatic forbidden thing. I wanted to make food. I wanted to cook. Specifically, I wanted to go to culinary school. I had wanted it since I was 12 years old and watched a documentary about a restaurant in Lyon, France, and felt something shift behind my sternum that I could not explain and did not try to. My father was an engineer. My uncle was a doctor. My cousin Rami was finishing his MBA. The plan for me was medicine. It had always been medicine. Nobody announced this. It was just known. You know that feeling when you want something so badly that you start to feel ashamed of the wanting itself? Like the desire is the problem, not the circumstances? Like if you were a better person, a more grateful person, you would just stop? That was me, for years. I made it through 2 years of pre-med. I was miserable in the specific airless way that high-functioning people are miserable, getting good grades, sleeping badly, praying, and then lying in the dark afterward wondering why I felt nothing. Not peace, not presence, just the sound of my own breathing. Junior year, I signed up for an elective, food science. Told myself it was practical, it was chemistry, it was fine. I sat in that classroom the first day, and the professor slid a syllabus across the table, and I felt more awake than I had in 2 years. That was the problem. My mother called every Sunday. The calls were warm, full of food updates and neighborhood gossip and questions about whether I was eating enough. She never asked about my grades. She didn't have to. She asked about prayer. "You're still praying, Habibi?" "Yes, Mama." All 5. I would pause for just a beat too long. "Yes, Mama." One Sunday in March, junior year, I told her I was thinking about changing my major. The silence on the other end of the phone was not angry. It was worse than angry. It was confused. Like I had said something in a language she didn't recognize. "Changing to what?" she said finally. "I don't know yet. Maybe something with food, nutrition maybe, or..." Tariq. Just my name, just that. "It's not decided," I said quickly. "I'm just thinking." "Your father worked double shifts for 3 years to save for your application fees. You know that?" "I know that." "And you want to cook?" She didn't say it cruelly. That's what I keep coming back to. She said it the way you'd say it if someone told you they wanted to solve world hunger by painting watercolors. Not mean. Just baffled. Like the logic was so broken she couldn't find the entry point to argue with it. I said, "Never mind, it was just a thought." And she said, "You think too much, Habibi. Always in your head. Come home for Eid and eat something." And I laughed. And she laughed. And I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed and did not move for a very long time. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to make my mother the villain of this story. She is not the villain. She is a woman who ironed fabric in the dark for 37 years because she believed in something larger than herself. And she raised me to believe in something too. And the tragedy, if there is one, is not that she was wrong. It's that she was right about everything except me. I stopped going to the pre-med advisor's office. I started staying late in the food science lab, longer than I needed to, running experiments nobody assigned me, reading about fermentation and flavor compounds and the Maillard reaction like it was scripture. I prayed less. Not none, I want to be honest, but less. And when I prayed, I felt the distance. I felt like I was standing at a door that used to open easily, and now my hands weren't finding the handle right. I didn't know if I had moved away from God, or if I was just finally being honest with God for the first time. Maybe those are the same thing, I'm still not sure. The moment I couldn't ignore anymore came on a Tuesday night in April. I had stayed late in the lab again. It was almost 10. I was walking back across campus and I passed the Culinary Arts building. Ohio State has one, not many people know that. And through the lit window, I could see students plating food, moving around each other in that quiet, synchronized way that professional kitchens have. And I stopped walking. I just stood there on the path in the dark, looking in through the window like a kid outside a candy store. And I thought, not the food exactly, the belonging, the purpose, the feeling of making something with your hands that someone else receives into their body and feels something. And then, immediately, the other voice. I stood there for a long time. The wind was cold. I remember my jacket wasn't warm enough and I didn't move anyway. And I thought about the Shahada on my wall in my mother's handwriting. And I thought about the iron hissing in the dark. And I thought about Lion, France, and a documentary I watched at 12 years old. And I thought, I didn't have an answer. I walked home. I didn't change my major that year. I want to be honest about that too, because the version of this story where I had one big realization and everything shifted, that's not what happened. What happened was slower and less clean. I finished pre-med. I did not apply to medical school. I told my parents I needed a gap year to figure things out. My father went very quiet. My mother asked if I was sick. I said no. She asked if I was in trouble. I said no. She said, "Then what?" And I said, "I just need some time." And she said, "Time for what, Tariq? Time is not a plan." She wasn't wrong. I'm in that gap year now. I work at a restaurant, not cooking yet, just prep work, learning the rhythm of a real kitchen, and I'm applying to culinary programs for the fall. I pray more than I did last year. Not perfectly, not 5 times every day without fail, but I've stopped treating prayer like a performance review and started treating it more like a conversation I'm allowed to show up to imperfectly. I don't know if that's progress or compromise. Some days it feels like both. My mother sent me a package last month. Inside was a jar of her Fool Madame's, sealed carefully, wrapped in newspaper. No note, just the food. I opened it and sat at my kitchen table and ate it cold, straight from the jar, and I cried in the specific way you cry when something is sad and also exactly right at the same time. I think that was her saying something she doesn't have the words for yet. I think I'm still learning the language too. I don't know where I land on faith. I don't know if God is disappointed in me, or if I've just been confusing God's voice with my Father's voice for so long that I can't tell them apart anymore. I don't know if I'll ever fully bridge the person my family raised and the person I'm slowly, awkwardly becoming. But I know that when I'm in that kitchen at 6 in the morning and the light is gray and I'm breaking down vegetables and the whole room smells like something coming alive, I feel something. It's not so different from what I felt during Ramadan, in the dark, listening to my father recite. Maybe that's blasphemy. Maybe that's the closest thing to prayer I've got right now. The Thai takeout menu is still on my wall. I keep meaning to throw it away. I think I'm keeping it because it reminds me that I live here now, in the in-between, in the space between who I was handed and who I'm still becoming, and that the in-between is not a waiting room. It's just where I live. Some secrets aren't chosen. They just settle in, the way dust does quietly without asking permission. Exhale. You know that feeling when something happens and you just know you won't say it out loud? Not because you decided not to, but because the air around it went still, and the moment to speak somehow passed before it ever really arrived. The next voice you'll hear learned that stillness young, in a place that was supposed to be safe, with someone who tried to cross a line and left her alone on the other side of it. She didn't tell anyone. For a long time. Confessed the folder marked later. My name is Priya, and I need you to understand something before I say any of this. I was at school. Not in a braggy way. In a survival way. Being good at school was the one thing I knew how to do without being taught how to do it. It was the thing that made me feel like I had a place in a room. Which is probably why what happened with Mr. Callahan hit the way it did. Okay, let me start where it actually starts. Weston Preparatory Academy. And I know, the name sounds like the kind of place where everyone wears blazers and has a trust fund, but it wasn't quite that. It was more like a school that to be that. Underfunded ambition, if that makes sense. The carpets in the main hall were this deep burgundy color that had been vacuumed so many times they'd gone thin in the middle, like a path worn through grass. The walls smelled like old radiator heat and whiteboard marker. And there was always someone's forgotten lunch somewhere. That specific smell of a banana that's been in a locker since Tuesday. I was 16. I was a junior. And that year, the thing I wanted more than anything, more than friends, more than a driver's license, more than whatever it was other girls wanted, was to be. Mr. Callahan taught AP English Literature. He had this reputation before you even walked into his class. Upperclassmen talked about him the way people talk about a difficult hike. Like, yes, it's brutal. Yes, you will suffer. But the view at the top is worth it. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. With reading glasses, he was always losing on top of his head and a habit of pacing while he talked like the room was too small for his thoughts. He wasn't conventionally warm. That's important. He wasn't the teacher who learned everyone's birthday or kept candy on his desk. His warmth was more like he paid attention in a specific way. When he looked at you while you were answering a question, you felt like he was actually listening, not just waiting for you to finish so he could respond. That sounds like it should be the bare minimum, right? But you know how rare that actually is? His class met fourth period, right after lunch. Room 214. The desks were arranged in a horseshoe, which he said was so that we were in conversation with each other, not just with me. He wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation. He always had a coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. He underlined everything in his books in red pen, and if you asked to borrow one, you'd find his notes in the margins. Not neat annotations, but arguments. Full sentences. Sometimes question marks and exclamation points stacked on top of each other like he'd been genuinely shocked by a paragraph. I loved that class. I loved it the way you love something that makes you feel like a better version of yourself just by being in it. The first time he really and I mean noticed me in a way that mattered, not just called on me, was about 6 weeks into the semester. We were doing, I know, classic. Everyone does Gatsby. But Mr. Callahan was doing something interesting with it. He was asking us to argue the book. Not to critique it academically, but to genuinely fight it. To find the thing Fitzgerald was most proud of and push back. I raised my hand and said something about how the book romanticizes Gatsby's obsession and calls it love, and that felt dangerous to me. That we were being asked to find a man's inability to let go of a woman when really it was just sad and a little frightening. The room went quiet in that way. Rooms go quiet when someone said something that landed. And Mr. Callahan looked at me, really looked, and he said, "I know. How that sounds now." But at 16, sitting in a room where I'd spent most of my life feeling like I was one wrong answer away from being invisible, that felt like oxygen. After that, I became one of his students. I mean, I was always enrolled, but I became one of students. The ones he'd stop in the hall to ask if they'd read something. The ones he'd leave photocopied articles in their mailboxes with a single line underlined and a question mark next to it. Like, he did this for maybe 4 or 5 of us. I told myself that. I reminded myself consciously that I wasn't the only one. That this was just how he taught, through selective, intense engagement. And for a while, that was true. My routine that semester: I'd get to school early, stop by room 214 before first period to drop off whatever I'd been working on. He was always there, earlier than anyone, coffee already cold, papers already spread. We'd talk for maybe 10 minutes, about the reading, about writing, about whatever he'd been thinking about. Those 10 minutes were the best part of my day. I am still embarrassed to say that, but it's the truth. The first moment something felt off, and I want to be careful here, because it wasn't a loud moment, it was barely a whisper, was in October. I'd stayed after class to talk about my essay draft. Everyone else had filed out. It was just me and him, and the room had that specific late afternoon quality, the light going orange through the Venetian blinds, the radiator ticking. He read through my pages while I sat across from him, and then he looked up and said, and I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't about the essay. It wasn't about Fitzgerald. It was about, and it was, accurate, in a way that felt like he'd reached into somewhere private without asking permission. I laughed it off. I said something like, maybe that's just my writing voice. He nodded slowly and said, I walked home that day with a feeling I couldn't name. Not bad exactly. Not good exactly. Just unsettled. Like a picture frame that's slightly crooked and you can't stop noticing it. I filed it away, in the folder marked dot. Later never came, or rather, it came all at once. It was November, a Thursday. I remember because we had a half day on Fridays that week, and I was thinking about that, about the weekend, about nothing important, when he asked me to stay after class to go over the semester project rubric. That was normal. He did that with students regularly. What wasn't normal was that he closed the door. Room 214 had a window in the door, a long, narrow rectangle of glass. When the door was open, you could see the hallway. When it was closed, you could still see through the window, but it felt different. It felt deliberate. I sat down, He pulled his chair around to my side of the desk instead of sitting across from me. And then he started talking. Not about the rubric, about me. About how he'd been thinking about my writing. About how he felt like we had a connection that was different from teacher and student. About how he'd never had a student who understood things the way I did. He said, "I didn't know that." I mean, some part of me had noticed something, but I had filed it away. I had told myself I was misreading it. I had told myself this was just how gifted teachers operated, with intensity, with investment. I sat very still. Inside, my brain was doing something I can only describe as rerouting, like a GPS that keeps recalculating because the road you thought you were on doesn't exist anymore. Every memory of every morning conversation was reshuffling itself. Every underlined article. I didn't say anything. I think I nodded. I think I said something like, "I really appreciate your support," in this voice that didn't sound like me. This careful, flat, diplomatic voice that just wanted to get out of the room. He looked at me for a long moment. And then he leaned back, and something shifted in his face. Not anger, but something cooler, like a door closing. He said, and he handed me the paper. I walked out into the hallway and stood there for a second, and the fluorescent lights were buzzing the way they always buzzed, and someone's locker slammed somewhere, and the world was completely normal. I was not completely normal. You know that feeling when something happens and your brain just doesn't file it correctly? Like it goes into a folder marked, and later, never comes? I stood in that hallway and I thought all of those things in the span of about 30 seconds. And then I went to my next class, and I didn't tell anyone. I started keeping my coat on during fourth period. Even in November, even when the radiator was going full blast and the room was stuffy and warm, I kept my coat on. I don't know why. I think I wanted something between me and the room. I stopped going in early. I sat at the far end of the horseshoe near the door. Not dramatically. I just drifted there, over the course of a week or two, the way you drift toward an exit when a room starts to feel crowded. I stopped raising my hand as much. I watched him teach, and he was still good at it. That's the thing that made it complicated. He was still sharp and funny and precise. He still made other students feel like their ideas mattered. And I would sit there watching that happen and feel something I didn't have a word for yet. Something like grief, something like betrayal, something like... I told one person. My friend Danny, who sat next to me in chemistry and had known me since 8th grade. I told her on a Saturday in her car, parked outside a Walgreens, because that's where the important conversations happen when you're 16. In cars, in parking lots, in the 10 minutes before you have to go back inside somewhere. I told her what he'd said, as close to word for word as I could remember. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Bria, that's not okay." And I said, "I know, but he didn't anything. He just said..." "He said that to you, alone, with the door closed. You were 16 and he was your teacher." She looked at me. "That's not nothing." I cried a little, not a lot, just enough to know that I'd needed someone to say it out loud. She asked if I wanted to tell someone at school, a counselor, the vice principal. I said I didn't know. I said I was scared that no one would believe me. I said I was scared that they believed me, and then everything would blow up, and somehow it would become my fault for making it a thing. Danny didn't push. She just said, "Whatever you decide, I'm here." I didn't report it that year. I transferred out of AP English at the semester break. I told the guidance office it was a scheduling conflict. No one questioned it. Mr. Callahan didn't seek me out. He didn't try to talk to me. I don't know what that means, whether he understood what he'd done, or whether I simply stopped being interesting to him once I'd made it clear I wasn't going to respond the way he'd hoped. That thought, that second possibility, took a long time to stop hurting. I'm 24 now. I found out, a few years after I graduated, that he'd been removed from Weston. I don't know the full story. I heard it secondhand, through someone who still knew people there. I don't know if it involved another student. I don't know if it was something similar or something worse. I sat with that information for a long time. I felt guilty, even though I know that makes no logical sense. I felt like if I had said something earlier, maybe long exhale, maybe I could have done something. And then I felt angry at myself for feeling guilty. And then I felt angry at for making me feel guilty about something he did. That's the long tail of it, right? The way it rearranges your internal logic. The way you spend years untangling what was your responsibility and what wasn't. What was real and what was a performance designed to make you feel chosen. I still love literature. I want you to know that. I still underline things in red pen. I still argue with books in the margins. I still think that a classroom arranged in a horseshoe, everyone in conversation with everyone, is the right idea. I didn't let him take that. But I notice things now. I notice when someone's attention feels like a gift that comes with conditions attached. I notice closed doors. I notice the specific quality of being made to feel, that warm, particular light. And I ask myself, if you've ever had someone make you feel like the most interesting person in the room, you know how hard it is to let go of that. Even when you should. Even when something in the back of your mind is quietly, insistently, filing things into a folder you don't want to open. Open it. Not because it'll be easy. It won't be. But because I kept the folder closed for a long time, and I spent years wondering if what I remembered was real. It was real. Whatever you're carrying, whatever you filed away under, yours is real too. You're not alone in this room. I promise. Some things take a minute to settle. I'll be honest, the weight of it. What it costs a person to carry something like that alone, for that long. I have to. Yeah. Okay. You know, it's about the silence around it. What we couldn't say. Who we couldn't say it to. This next one, it starts there too. There's a lamp in Nadia's living room that's been dying for 2 years. It doesn't. This little stutter of light is like it's trying to say something and keeps losing its nerve. I noticed it the first time I came over, back when we were still the kind of new friends who explain things to each other. She said, I stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing things that become part of somewhere you belong. That lamp matters now. I'll get to why. My name is. I work in landscape architecture, which means I spend my days drawing plans for spaces where people are supposed to feel at ease. Gardens, courtyards, little urban pockets of green where strangers sit down and breathe for a minute. I am, professionally, someone who designs comfort. And I'm telling you this because I think it's funny, in the kind of way that isn't funny at all. Nadia and I met 4 years ago at a work event I was contractually obligated to attend. She was standing by the drinks table looking at her phone with the focus. I recognized that move so completely that I just walked over and said, whatever you're pretending to read, I hope it's good. She looked up. She laughed. That was it. That was the whole beginning. Here's what our friendship looked like before, and I want you to understand this part. Because it matters. Because the before is what makes the after so terrifying. Thursday nights, almost without exception. Her apartment, because mine is a 40-minute commute. And hers has a couch that is genuinely one of the best couches I've ever sat on in my life. We'd order from the Thai place 2 blocks over. Same order, almost every time. Pad see ew for her, drunken noodles for me. One order of those crispy spring rolls we'd split, and she'd always eat 4. And I'd always pretend I didn't notice. We had a bit about her coffee maker. It's one of those manual pour-over situations, very serious. And she takes it very seriously. I think it's objectively absurd to spend 11 minutes making a single cup of coffee. So every time she'd start the process, I'd set a timer on my phone. I'd stare at her with this expression of theatrical grief. She'd ignore me completely. She'd narrate the steps in this deadpan voice like a nature documentary. The water must be precisely 93 degrees, anything less, and the bloom is compromised. And I'd say, Nadia, I could have had a gas station cappuccino in 30 seconds. And she'd say, and you would have deserved it. 4 years of that. 4 years of the flicker lamp and the Thai food and the coffee bit and the couch. 4 years of knowing exactly what it felt like to be inside that friendship, safe and easy and chosen. That's the thing about a place you belong. You don't know you're standing in it until you're afraid of losing it. It was a Saturday. That's already unusual. We were a Thursday friendship. But Nadia had called the night before and said she was having a rough week. Did I want to come over? And I said yes before she finished asking. I want to be honest about what I walked into. She wasn't falling apart. It wasn't dramatic. She was just quieter than usual. She'd had some news about her mom's health, nothing immediately serious. But the kind of thing that sits on your chest and makes everything feel slightly underwater. The apartment was the same as always, her plants crowding the windowsill. The faint smell of the candle she burns that's supposed to be cedar wood, but smells more like a forest after rain, the lamp in the corner doing its thing. We ate dinner. We watched something. I couldn't tell you what. I don't think either of us was really watching. We talked, but the way you talk when you're not ready to say the real thing yet. She kept tucking her feet up under her on the couch, which she does when she's tired. I kept my hands around my mug of tea and let the conversation go wherever it needed to go. At some point, maybe 10 o'clock, she said, Can you just sit closer? Not weird. We were friends who sat close. I moved over. She leaned into me, her head on my shoulder. That wasn't unusual either. We'd done that before, watching something sad, or when she was tired. I put my arm around her the way I had before, easy, natural, and we sat there in the quiet. And then the lamp flickered. And I don't know why. I genuinely cannot explain this to you. But in that little stutter of light, I looked down at her. Just to check on her, that was all. And she looked up at the same moment. Just to check on me, maybe. And we were very close. Her face was right there. And something in the room changed. I don't have a better word for it than that. Something shifted, the way air pressure shifts before weather. Neither of us moved. You know that moment, and I think you do know this moment. When your body has already made a decision, and it's just waiting to see if the rest of you will catch up. When you're not sure if you're leaning forward or if gravity is just doing something different than usual. I was aware of everything. I was aware of the weight of her head against my shoulder just a second ago. I was aware of the specific way she was looking at me. Which was not the way she usually looked at me, or maybe it was. And I had just never let myself see it. I was aware of my own heartbeat in a way that felt almost rude. Like my body was announcing itself too loudly. She said very quietly, Cora. Just my name, nothing else. And I said, I know. I don't know what I meant. I still don't know what I meant. But it felt true when I said it. And then she kissed me. Or I kissed her. It was the kind of thing that doesn't really have a clear author. It was brief, it was soft. It was like the lamp. A flicker, and then it stopped. We both pulled back at the same moment. The silence was enormous. I kept picking up my mug of tea and putting it down without drinking from it. I did that 4 times. I counted. She said, I don't know where that came from. And I said, it's okay. And she said, is it? And I said, I don't know. Which was the most honest thing I'd said all night. I left around 11. The goodbye was careful. We hugged at the door, but it was the hug of 2 people trying to prove something. That we were fine, that nothing had tilted. That we still knew how to be ourselves near each other. I think we both failed at it. I think we both knew we failed at it. I drove home on the highway. And I want to tell you that I had some kind of clarity on that drive, some moment of understanding. I didn't. I just drove. I kept the radio off. I watched the lights of other cars and thought about nothing and everything simultaneously. Which is not a productive mental state, but was apparently the only one available to me. I got home. I sat on my kitchen floor, not for any dramatic reason. I just didn't make it to a chair. And I sat there for a while. Here's what I felt, and I'm going to list them because they were all present at the same time. And pretending otherwise would be a lie. I felt confused. I felt warm. I felt a low, spreading panic that started somewhere behind my sternum. I felt something I recognized dimly as hope, and I hated that I felt it. Because hope in that context was dangerous. I felt grief, preemptively, for a Thursday night version of our friendship that I was suddenly not sure I'd ever get back. And underneath all of it, the quietest and most persistent feeling, I felt like I'd been keeping a secret from myself for a long time. And the secret had finally gotten tired of waiting. I didn't text her that night. She didn't text me. The next day, nothing. The day after that, she sent me a meme about pour-over coffee. A video of someone doing the most elaborate, fussy, unnecessary brewing process imaginable, captioned, "You when you make a single cup." And I stared at it for a long time. Because it was so perfectly, specifically us. Because it was her saying, "I'm still here. Are you still there?" I laughed, and I know how that sounds. I actually sat there laughing at my phone on a Tuesday morning. Because it was funny, and it was also the most relieved I'd felt in 3 days. I wrote back, "That video is 11 minutes long. I watched all 11 minutes. I think I have a problem." She sent back a single laughing emoji. And then, a minute later, "We should talk. For real. When you're ready." And I wrote back, "Thursday?" And she wrote back, "Thursday." I haven't been yet. It's Wednesday, as I'm telling you this. Tomorrow I'll drive to her apartment. And I'll sit on that couch, and the lamp will flicker. And I genuinely do not know what's going to happen. I don't know what she felt. I don't know if it was a moment of grief and closeness that translated into something it didn't mean. Or if it meant exactly what it felt like. I don't know if she wants to talk about it or talk around it. I don't know if I'm capable of saying the thing I think I might need to say. What I know is this. I spent 2 days trying to talk myself out of what I felt. And it didn't work. I spent 2 days telling myself that the friendship was the only important thing. And I still believe that. But I also believe that pretending the rest of it doesn't exist is its own kind of loss. You can love something so much that you refuse to look at it directly. I've been doing that, I think, for longer than just that Saturday night. I'm not going over there tomorrow with an agenda. I'm not going to walk in with a speech. I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to let it be whatever it is. And if there's a moment that feels like the right moment, I'm going to stop being so careful. That's all I've decided. That's the only resolution I've got. But I keep thinking about that lamp. 2 years of meaning to replace the bulb. 2 years of the same small flicker every 20 minutes. Trying to say something and losing its nerve. I think it's time to stop losing my nerve. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles after you've heard 5 people tell the truth. Not peaceful exactly, more like the air after a storm. Still charged, still a little unsettled, but real in a way that ordinary air isn't. Someone stole something small and felt something enormous about it. Someone is carrying a version of themselves that doesn't fit the life they were handed. Someone stood in a hallway at 13 years old and had their sense of safety rearranged by a person who was supposed to protect it. And then walked back to class like nothing happened. Someone is watching the person they love most figure out who they are, and not knowing where that leaves them. 5 confessions. 5 people who found words for something they'd been holding without words. If any piece of that sat somewhere tender in you, I'm not going to tell you what it means. You already know. You felt it before I said anything. What I will say is this. The things we don't say out loud don't disappear. They just wait, sometimes for years. Sometimes for a conversation like this one. If someone came to mind while you were listening, someone you think might need to sit in this space for a while, send them here. No explanation required, just listen to this. That's what this is for. Some things are easier to carry once you know someone else has held something like it.